Hello everybody and welcome to this video on Unity UI Toolkit. In this video we will extend the approach from the previous video where we toggled two screens to a main menu. In addition, I will have a look at data binding and scriptable objects, meaning how we may pass data from one scene to another scene. So we have two things to have a closer look at: the main menu and the scriptable object. And both parts I represent in a way to have first a look at the concept, and then we go into code and the Unity editor. All the code you will find in a public GitLab repository. So first see what we are going to implement. Here we have a simple main menu where we can switch between different screens. Then we have a settings screen, and this data will be available in another scene, the game scene. In addition, we can log out and go back to a login screen. If we want to implement something like this, we have to answer two questions. What are our UI components and which events do we need? We will use events, or more precisely multicast delegates, to communicate between two classes. So if we have a look at this screen, we obviously have some sort of main navigation. That's the one on the left hand side. And we have two screens, the settings screen and the statistics screen on the right hand side, which we hide and show according on whatever we press in the main navigation. So this right-hand side will be a visual element, a container, which we call main content. And there we will have the children, settings screen and statistics screen. The navigation itself will be handled in the main navigation view, but game and logout are special buttons. So if you press on game, we will navigate to a different scene. And the same happens on logout. So we will need two events, start game or game and logout. We will follow the general approach from the previous video where we have a scene. Within the scene we have a game object of type UIDocument. This has a property attached to main menu screen UXML. Within this main menu screen UXML, we define templates based on these UXML files and create instances for these UXML files. And statistics screen and settings screen will be children of main content, a container within main menu screen. Then we add a manager script component to this game object of type monoBehavior. This manager creates view classes related to these UXML files where we implement all the interaction. And the same we do for the main menu view. The main menu view basically invokes the events start game and logout, and the manager class listens to these events and does the navigation to another scene. The manager has access to this UI document and hence may set up the views and create instances of StatisticsView, SettingsView and MainMenuView where we pass these visual elements as a parameter in the constructor. In addition, we implement private methods, subscribe to events and unsubscribe from events, and methods handling these events. And this we will do in onEnable and onDisable when everything is available. So in onEnable we create instances for all these members and subscribe to start game and logout. And in onDisable we unsubscribe from start game and logout because these events are public static and hence it might live longer than this manager class. The main menu view is similar as we implement all views, where we have the constructor, and this constructor gets a top element, so we can fetch all the controls. But this main menu also gets the parameter main content, where statistics screen and settings screen, so the visual elements of these screens, are children. In addition, as usual, we have the buttons, and view fetch the buttons and so on in set visual elements, and register UI callbacks handling button click in this private method. And we have a private method show, which gets a panel name, meaning statistics screen or settings screen or statistics panel or settings panel, whatever your naming is, and showing and hiding the screens accordingly. Although we only have 2 screens we are toggling, the implementation works for more than 2. If this was a bit too fast, check the previous video to understand the general approach I'm taking. So let's start with the implementation of the main menu. We will start to set up the main menu screen UXML with the navigation and the screens as instances of these templates. So the main menu screen defines the templates based on main navigation UXML, statistics panel UXML, and so on, and creates instances where we need them. So the main navigation is in the main container, while statistics panel and settings panel are in a different container with the name main content panel. The navigation is very simple, as well as the statistics panel, and we will have a closer look at the settings panel when we have a look at the data binding. So that's all set up. Now we will define the events and the statistics view and the settings view, implementing the interaction of those 2 screens. The events we implement in a different folder. Main menu events, we have the start game action, and I added the logout action to the login events. As everything is public static, you can access them from anywhere, anyway. The view classes I put in UI views. So we have the statistics view with the counter. We get the top element as a parameter in the constructor, and remember it as a private field. And then we have the methods set visual elements and register UI callbacks. In set visual elements, we fetch all the controls we need. In this case, it's a button and a label. And in register UI callbacks, we add a handler to the clicked event of the button. So very simple. And in the settings view, nothing needs to be done. So this was easy. Now comes the main navigation view, where we get another parameter, the main content panel. In addition, we need to define this private method show, implementing the logic to show and hide these screens. So again, we have the same structure. We have the top element, we have the button elements. In addition, we have the main content panel, which we get as a second parameter here. Then we set up the visual elements and register the UI callbacks and make sure we will start with the settings panel. So in set visual elements, we fetch the buttons, and in register UI callbacks, we define what should happen if we click on a button. So if we click on the game button, we basically invoke the start game event, and in logout, we do the same. In addition, you could implement a data manager as a singleton, and maybe you have to save some more data before performing the logout. The method show gets a panel name, for example, settings panel or statistics panel. And here we fetch all the children and set is visible to false for each child. And then we fetch the panel we got as a parameter and set is visible to true. Set is visible is implemented as an extension method where we extend the class visual element by this method set is visible, which gets a parameter display, and we set the style display of this visual element to be either flex or none to show it or hide it. You will find a more general approach in this example provided by Unity, which implements a tab menu. So now we come to the manager class, which extends mono behavior, has access to the UI document, set up the views, and subscribes and unsubscribes to these events. All managers are mono behaviors which are put in a separate folder. And as we need this UI document, you can add this annotation, require component. And in onEnable, we fetch the component, set up the views and subscribe to events. And in onDisable, we unsubscribe from the public static events. To set up the views, we fetch our root element of the UI document, the main content panel, the settings panel, statistics panel, and main navigation according to the names of our instances here. Then we create instances of our view classes. That's all we have to do to set up the views. Then we subscribe to the public events we are interested in and unsubscribe from them if we run into onDisable. The handlers basically do the navigation to another scene. In the next step, we need to add a GameObject of type UIDocument to our scene and wire it up with the main menu screen and the manager. So go into the Unity editor, into your scene, create a new GameObject of type UIDocument, which I did here. Then drag and drop your main menu screen into the source asset property and add the MainMenuManager as a script to this component. Now we come to the second part of this video and address the problem to parse and modify data across scenes. We will do so to use data binding with ScriptableObjects. Data binding requires Unity 2023.2 and above, so make sure your project uses this version. First, we define a data class extending ScriptableObject. There we define public members and we may define converters. You will find a good example how to implement a converter in this example in the Unity manual. In this video, I don't need converters. Then we create an asset from this data class, and this asset holds your data, and in your UXML file, you access this asset with the data source property and define your binding based on this data source. Then I strongly suggest to use the UI builder just for testing, not for the data binding, to check if everything is wired up correctly. So we define a class called settings, extend ScriptableObject, and define some public members, name and age. We can add annotation like header bindable property and a range for the age. And to be able to create an asset, you need this annotation create asset menu, where the file name holds the default file name of this asset, and the menu name structures how this will be put into the create menu of your Unity editor. So anywhere, like I did here in the data folder, right click, create, and now I have this Learn UI Toolkit settings SO, just as I wrote it here. It's Learn UI Toolkit, and there we have the submenu settings SO. And if I create it, I get the default file name settings.so.asset. And I can check what is in the asset, and I can even change it. And here you see everything is wired up correctly. So even without running it, I can see it works. And how to wire it up in the UXML file, we will start with the game scene, so check it there too. I open up the settings SO asset properties in a separate window to have it available all the time. By the way, the slider goes from 99 to 18 as we limited it here with range, and the binder properties, the header, is found here as a heading for these fields. So let's go to the game scene where we simply show the name. So it's an easier data binding. And if we go into game screen UXML, we need to define our data source. This attribute you can use in any visual element, and it defines the data source for any binding for all the children in this visual element. For a concrete binding, like binding this label to the name, we need the attribute data source path, and the binding mode is reading it, just showing the data, meaning from the source, which is this asset, to the target, which is this label, we are getting the data. And be careful what property you are using. Unless you are using any converters, it will be value, independent that we actually bind this text It's the value of this name field we are interested in. So that was the first and simpler binding. Now have a look at the settings panel where we actually change the values. So we have a two-way data binding, which is the default one. So you will not see it here. Again, we need to define a data source. You see here I use an absolute path, while here I use a relative path, just to show you both options. Usually I will go for the relative path. Here we have the name field, a text field. So we again have the data source name and the property value. And here we have an integer field where we access the age field. So data source is age and the property again is value. That was all you needed to do to access the same data which is stored in this asset based on a scriptable object, and to access it and change it from different scenes. So what did we do? We have a main menu scene with a game object of UIDocument where we attach the main menu screen UXML and the settings screen UXML. This uses a scriptable object data asset as data source, and we do the same in the game scene, accessing the same asset. As I said, whenever you navigate between scenes, make sure they are part of the build settings. Although this looks very simple, I ran into several problems, so I want to make you aware of them. First, use relative or absolute path to address your scriptable object asset. Don't use the code generation of the UI builder. Always bind to the value property, unless you're using any data converters, because it's the value of your field you're interested in. Be careful where you define your data source attribute, because relatively to this one, you can access this data source path. And first I started using the UI builder to define my data binding, and this put anywhere data sources and messed up everything. And errors are really difficult to find because you don't get any information. So whenever suddenly your UI looks strange, check your bindings. And that's the only thing I'm doing in the UI builder. For example, I open the settings panel in the UI builder, and just with the UXML file, without putting it into the scene and wiring up with the UI document, I can check the data binding here. So I first the direction of going from the settings asset to the UI. It works. And in the preview, I can check the other way around. So if I change the number here, it changes in the properties of the asset. So that was all I wanted to show in the video. If you question yourself how to implement localization, I suggest you wait for Unity 6 because they are working on it to make it easier. And if you're interested in anything else on UI Toolkit, feel free to use the comments and I will see what I can do. Thanks for watching and bye-bye.